Hi everyone and welcome to Fresh from My Garden. So here what you're seeing is a dragon fruit plant that we purchased from the nursery recently, and it does have a few branches in it, and we are going to take some cuttings today. So this was a pretty expensive plant. Usually the dragon fruits that we have purchased previously come between 80 to 100 rupees per plant, but this plant was pretty expensive and almost four times that price. So today I'm going to be taking few cuttings of this plant. Now this is a plant that we purchased recently, and this is the small one that I was talking about, and it is usually available for between 80 to 100 rupees per plant. This plant is planted next to our dining room patio, so you can see that it has a very strong structure and a metal pole onto which it can climb and grow up for support. Dragon fruit is a tropical or a subtropical cactus plant that produces these big, beautiful fruits, and they need a support system to grow on. So, this is the support system that will help this plant go up this structure and over a period of time produce more branches and a lot of fruit. Usually, these plants are set to start fruiting a year or two after planting. So, this is one that we planted earlier, probably a few months back. I don't exactly remember, but this was purchased in the same size of the plant that you saw previously. But as you can see, it has a lot of new growth on it, and this is planted in a container. And next to this, also, we have a metal trellis so that it can climb onto the trellis and grow well and provide a lot of branches. Since it is a tropical or a subtropical plant, it requires a lot of sunlight. So always make sure to plant these where they get a lot of sunlight. And we have a few plants, couple of them in containers and a couple of them in the ground. And I'm also going to take cuttings from the new plant that we purchased. So, as you saw, two of our plants they grow easily from small cuttings. So, to take a cutting, just snip off at the point where a branch meets the main stem. So, this is how it looks after you have taken the cutting. And it is not very easy to root in this form. So, what we need to do is to take a pair of shears that has been sterilized and cleaned well, and then the tip cut off the tip to expose the cactus flesh. You can see the triangle part of the cactus flesh that is exposed. So, this is how we need to plant these dragon fruit cuttings in the ground. And before we plant them, we need these wounds to heal or callus over so that they don't get any pest infection once they are planted in the ground. So here is the second cutting, and in the same way as I cut the previous one, I'm cutting this also to expose the fleshy part of the cactus. And we are going to let this wound heal for 3 to 4 days before we plant this in the ground. So, since we are having continuous rains where we live, it's going to take a little extra time for these wounds to heal and dry out because there is a lot of moisture in the air. So, let this sit aside in a dry spot in your garden or indoors where it can heal. So, this plant, as you can see, is grown well, and I can take a few more cuttings because it has branched out well. Now, since I have already taken a couple of cuttings, I'll wait for this plant to grow before taking more cuttings. And another thing to keep in mind while handling this plant is that the thorns are extremely sharp and can scratch and cut your fingers. So it's better to use a pair of gloves while handling this plant. Now, this plant from where I've taken cuttings will go into another container on our terrace garden. Now it has been transplanted into a container on our terrace garden. And when we are planting these, make sure that they have a big container or a bucket so that it has lot of space for the roots to grow and develop well. Here we have used a 20 to 25 liter bucket, and these are the buckets that we have been using over several years for different kinds of plants, and this will have enough room for this plant to grow. And we have also given a support system, and it is also next to our terrace wall. This is another plant that has been growing in the container on our terrace garden, and you can see the formation of aerial roots on this plant. This was planted a few months back, just like the small one that I showed you in the ground. So it was just a small one, and the yellow green leaves that you see are the new growth. So, just like what you see here, it just had one small base stem and one small tiny branch, and this is the growth that we are seeing in probably 4 to 5 months, and it is also having new roots. So these new roots will cling on to whatever support system that is available for it to grow and get bigger. After 3 to 4 days, these are the calloused stem cuttings that we have here. So now the wounds have healed and dried out completely, and they are ready for planting. So these are going to get planted in the ground next to this stand here. So this was a stand where we had a hammock, but now our hammock has been completely destroyed and taken over by termites. So this spot is empty. We also have a few hanging planters, and the other one is going on to this support system outside our dining room patio. So on the ground, you can see one small stem cutting that I had planted earlier. So this is not actually a stem cutting, this was a plant that we purchased. So one has been planted here and one will be planted near the other side of this trellis. So on the other side of this trellis, where the other metal pole is, that is where I'm going to be planting the other cutting. So I'm going to cover this up with some pseudomonas because we are having constant rains and I don't want any sort of fungal infection or anything to infect this plant and for us to lose this plant. So I'm adding a little pseudomonas, and that is also completely wet due to these constant rains. So I'm going to let it dry for a bit. So once this dries, it is ready for planting. You can also skip this step, but I just wanted to do it because we are having constant rains and I don't want any sort of fungal infection to infect these cactus cuttings that we have taken. So here I have dug a hole of about a couple inches deep, and that should be enough. And these plants are not very picky about the soil that they grow in. They grow in almost any kind of soil with good drainage. So I'm going to plant one of this next to our dining room patio and one next to the stand on which we had our hammock earlier. Now, since this is a cactus plant, it requires a lot of sunlight to grow well. And this is in the south side of our garden, so it will receive a lot of sunlight. Also, make sure that when you're planting these, they have a strong support system or a trellis so that it can grow onto that and get the support that it needs for growing well. So, in addition to the two cuttings that we took from the big plant, we have four other dragon plants growing, a few in containers and few in the ground. So that's a total of six plants. These plants are said to start producing fruit in about 1 year. So hopefully we don't have to wait too long to see some budding and fruits on these plants. Hope you liked today's video. If you did, please don't forget to support and subscribe to my channel and watch all our videos regularly. Thanks for watching Fresh from my garden.